Good morning. My name is Suzanne Donovan, and I work at Savannah. And first of all, I want to say thank you so much. It's really an honor to be here. And Jody is somebody who has been, I would say, sort of a mentor to us in many ways in Savannah. So, and Eva, I'm just getting to know, although I grew up north of Philadelphia, I love that city very much. I am not a Savannian. I will start this by saying that, first of all, I feel like Jody gave us a bit of a challenge this morning in talking about who here had or was thinking about or, had any inkling to do some kind of a poverty initiative. And I'm going to say that anybody in this room that cares about economic development, anybody that cares about crime, anybody that cares about workforce development in their community, cares about poverty. Because it not only cuts across, but all of those issues are critical and really go right to the heart of poverty and frankly the work that we are doing across the country with other initiatives. Our organization, Step Up Savannah, we're right now a 501c3, but we came out of the city of Savannah, and I'm actually here today really representing our mayor, Edna Jackson. But the organization, actually, it started, it's a little bit younger than we were talking about earlier. Really, we came out of the 2005-2006 action plan, if you will. And it's a former mayor who sort of dug in and did research and was looking at poverty and how long and deep it had been a problem in Savannah. Savannah, obviously, is a city in the Deep South, the kinds of research that they did basically showed that a very, very high rate, 22% across the board in the city, had existed for more than 30 years. That rate has actually gone up now, in large measure, of course, because of the recession. We're now at about 25.5. But it did some very, very significant research, and that plan is called our action plan. It's on our website to the point of transparency, and it was a really important sort of foundational document because it showed everybody in the community the various components that interact to really help to create and sustain poverty and conditions of poverty. So our organization works to bring together business, government, social service agencies, and folks who live in poverty. And we look to identify and remove barriers that prevent folks from moving forward. Again, here's just some few statistics. We've got we're a relatively small city, about 136,000. We overall have a low median household income, 34,000. We've got low educational attainment rates. And again, these are fairly consistent over time, unfortunately. Issues that Savannah has been dealing with for some time. So in some ways, I would say that Step Up Savannah and the focus on poverty was an innovation for the city of Savannah. And to start to look at how we as a community might do things differently. The great thing about the action plan was that it allowed our former mayor, Otis Johnson, to basically call out the business community, which is really the genesis of us bringing that partnership to the table. And what he did, and what the business community did, those leaders that were there that were part of that original research, is that they actually framed it as an economic development issue, because they said, look, this is missed market opportunity, and it means something for all of us, because these are consumers that we can't tap into. And that was a very, very important shift. But to Eva's point and Jody's point, this kind of work is very, very difficult to sustain over time. And so I would argue that while it is critical for this work now to be city-based, and to have that political will, and that a city can offer that kind of, if you will, bully pulpit, over time, it can be very hard for a small city government like Savannah to continue to invest in that. And so that's, again, why our charge was to sort of get out and try to pull this community together and bring our business folks together. So we started with many different strategies. And if you go back and look at that action plan, you'll see there were at least 5, if not more, different strategies that we were going to engage in. And we subsequently have essentially narrowed it to workforce development and wealth building policy work, which is critical, because over time, that's how we're going to have an effect, a much, much larger effect, really. And we also work on what we call capacity building. That's because Savannah does not have a deep bench. We have many different kinds of organizations. We've got a lot of faith-based, we've got a lot of churches that are in this mix. But these are, a lot of them are very small, and the community-based organizations, of course, all are trying to respond to their funding imperatives. So to get folks together on the same plane, again, it takes an awful lot of work and time. But so the capacity building piece is actually working with organizations and with neighborhood leaders on actual organizational training and leadership training. So all of which we see as very, very key. We also attract and leverage resources. I mean, again, that is really sort of a key charge of our organization. So while we came out of the city, it initially was defined as a city initiative. In 2008, we made the important decision, I think, to become an independent 501c3. And I'll talk about our board composition in a minute. But we did that because, again, we knew that the city wasn't going to be able to sustain funding for this effort over the long haul. We also felt that, you know, it's a structure most foundations and even private individuals don't recognize, and they don't necessarily want to give to the city for poverty reduction, right? I mean, they will give to a 501c3. So these are some of the key ways that we work. So we've got now a 39-member board of directors. It's fairly large. But we have memorialized in our bylaws a structure where we have a third of government and business leaders, about a third of social service providers and nonprofits, and a third of folks who are neighborhood leaders from our high poverty census tracts. We also have a larger, if you will, structure. Step Up Savannah really is a network of partners, and there are about 90 different organizations. And again, that ranges from churches to city to county to businesses, many nonprofits, folks that are engaged in education, you name it. The founding partners, we've got our logos here, but they include our Savannah Economic Development Authority, the United Way, our city, Georgia Power, which is a key partner with us, the county, the Chamber of Commerce, and our school district. And those sort of key foundational partners remain engaged, but I would say honestly to varying levels. Really, the folks that have hung in there and continue to be deeply committed are economic development, the city of Savannah, Georgia Power, and our county. Now, one of the difficulties about our organization, and even right from the beginning, was that while we were charged to attract and leverage resources and bring people to the table, and Eve and I were talking about this last night, we also, they were basically, you know, people were very concerned about the start of a new organization and coming out of the city to talk about poverty. And the thinking was, are you going to be competing with the existing agencies that are out there? And that's a really important point to be thinking about. So our charge was one to be the collaborative, convening entity, and to really work to bring people to that table. And it has, unfortunately, created, I think, a real challenge, but you know, it's one that we deal with constantly, and that is this tension between providing direct service and being a collaborative convener. And this goes right to the heart of the funding issue, because you know, it is very difficult to raise money around collaboration. What does that mean? So you've got to be able to show some outcomes. So then you get right into the business of working with your agencies who are providing direct services and asking them to come to some common grounds about how they are going to measure what they do. And so this, again, the work takes a lot of relationship building, a lot of getting right in there. So on the one hand, we don't do a lot of direct service, but on the other hand, we are right in there with our direct service partners, talking with them about how they do their work. So one of the ways we chose to distinguish ourselves, one Jody mentioned, and I'll get to that in a second, and that's our business engagement, which has been a real hallmark, I think, of Step Up Savannah. But the other is to bring what I call big, inspiring ideas into the city of Savannah. And organizations like this actually really help. It was wonderful yesterday. I learned from so many of the different panelists about different ideas. And that's one thing we regularly do. So we get out there and connect with other organizations and learn about what they're doing. So we're part of a network called the Cities for Financial Empowerment. We rely on CLASP for a lot of information and data and thinking. And of course, we're very engaged also with the National League of Cities, which has been an extraordinary partner also with Savannah generally. But here's some of the more sort of specific drill down on some of the work. So we have a Bank on Savannah campaign that is, we actually, frankly, just took right from our partners in San Francisco. We also have a huge percentage of people who are unbanked. And in doing the research to pull together a banking and financial literacy program, we learned that well over 10% of our folks are unbanked, and using a huge percentage of people that are maybe using part of a bank, but they're also what I call fringe service providers. So the banking campaign, we combined with a partner, Consumer Credit Counseling Service, to provide free financial literacy. So the way this works very specifically, to talk about how a partnership can work and well, is we do the grant writing and pull in grant monies to do free financial literacy workshops. We bring our partners, the Consumer Credit Counseling Service, to the table and pay them to hire a financial educator. And that person goes out not only into the community, to our public libraries, they work with our banking partners in Bank on Savannah, but they work with our employer partners. So we go out into those large employers in particular who are open to providing financial literacy services during work hours, and we'll provide from like a 30-minute to an hour-long financial literacy workshop. And we're able to do that because we've developed those relationships and partners with those businesses. So it's been a really nice sort of combination of bringing in resources and then finding the right partner. So we're not on staff having to develop that particular expertise. The on-site employer services, we of course do benefit screening, via tax preparation, credit and budget workshops, as I was alluding to earlier. I'll just take 1 second and talk about our employer partnerships, because they really are critical. First of all, as I said, our former mayor really sort of put the call out to the business community, and by framing it, moving it off the dime of a sort of a moral issue, where this is something you should care about, and talking about it as an economic development issue, it really spurred and inspired folks to, I think a little bit differently and a little bit more critically about it. And then you combine that with some research about how certain kinds of fixes can help, and they don't have to be big money fixes, and it makes a big difference. But one of the things that we were extraordinarily fortunate in early on is to get a grant from the Ford Foundation, Families and Work Institute, and we were able to bring in somebody who was, for the first couple of years with Step Up, entirely devoted to working with business. And so she went out, and her whole job was to do nothing but get out and talk with our large and medium employers about what are the issues they are dealing with. And turnover, of course, was a big one. And the fact that this is fascinating to me, the way we got into our public benefits piece is we actually heard from our employers who were really pissed off because their low-wage workers were having to spend so much time going down to the DFAC's office to get their benefits, because we had this incredibly cumbersome service where they were still requiring people to go down and do everything in person. Now that has shifted some because the state of Georgia, like most states, lost significant funding, and now we have a whole series of other difficulties, which I'll get to in a second, in our policy work on food stamps. But the fact is, we actually got into the public benefits piece because we heard from employers, not because we heard necessarily, we knew that was an issue going into it, but it provided a whole other, if you will, rationale, and a different kind of partnership. And I have to tell you, when she started doing her work, she was talking with human resources folks who generally pride themselves on knowing their workforce. They really had some of those folks had no idea that some of their own employees were having difficulty at the end of the month even paying for their food. So she ran into the full gamut, people that were businesses that knew that their low-wage workers were applying for food stamps and didn't like the system, and then finding out for some of them that there were enough employees that needed benefits. And they then have started to use their own screening process with new employees coming in, and they will look at who needs food stamps and help them to understand that this is a benefit they can apply for. So it's been a really, really interesting learning process that goes back and forth. So switch gears. The one exception to us not doing any direct service is what's called the Chatham Apprentice Program, which is a relatively small workforce development program. And we do that because Chatham County, who came in as a partner, specifically said they wanted to do a workforce development program, and they asked us to create that. It's actually been a great benefit to us in many, many ways. And again, in large measure, I think because Savannah is a smaller community and we don't have a lot of community-based workforce development programs, what we call the CAP program has been very meaningful. And it also provides us, I think, with some really important on-the-ground information about workforce development issues. To Eva's point, and I think this is true across the board, we have a lot of folks who are ex-offenders, and that is a significant portion of our under and unemployed workforce. And so CAP really keeps us in tune with that and the issues that they are constantly dealing with. So it's something that we now, on a policy level, have gotten engaged with in terms of records restriction as well. The other thing that we do is we oversee what we call the Center for Working Families Network. And this is one of these things where Step Up found an idea. This particular sort of model came out of the Annie Casey Foundation. And it is, in some ways, a two-generation approach. But it, in essence, asks community-based providers that frequently will deal with people coming in on sort of an emergency basis. So people will come in total crisis, I just lost my house, or I've lost my benefits, or whatever. And the traditional way that folks have served them is try to just deal with that problem, and thank you very much, and and then they come in with the next crisis. This approach basically is one that asks people who are working with community-based agencies to, when someone comes in, ask a whole series of questions about other pieces of their life, about what their educational attainment is, and are they happy in their job or not happy, and look at the whole family. This has been a fascinating journey, I would say, and to the point of trying to bring ideas in and work with existing community-based agencies and get them on the same page. And this is very, very hard work because, again, many of these community-based agencies that are doing fabulous work in everybody's community have their own way of doing their business. And again, much of it is driven by their funders. And when you come in with a new idea and ask them to join a network so that we can share our metrics and share our data, you're asking them to get in and do their business differently. And that is taking some, I would say, time and commitment, and I know you understand this, Mitch. It really takes tremendous sort of relationship building again, and really getting in there and understanding what people are dealing with. So there are not too many other agencies that have the time to do that. Those that are out there that are direct service providers, and they also, it's difficult to come in, if you will, as a colleague agency and say, you should be doing it differently. So we get to come in, with this sort of broader umbrella and say, here's a really good idea, and let's talk about how we might do it differently. The other big key piece, as I say, is this Neighborhood Leadership Academy. We hold those about once a year. We just started a formal partnership with a local university, Savannah State University, and that's been another key piece of Step Up Savannah's work right from the beginning. And I think it's a really important piece across the board because on the policy level, we are informed very much by the work itself and by our neighborhood leaders. So we've got several levels. We've got folks that are on our board that serve, who are people who are living in poverty. We have what we call a resident team. that meets monthly, and then we have this Neighborhood Leadership Academy where we're developing leadership skills out in the community. And again, learn from folks directly about what they're dealing with. What everybody is interested here, I think, really is on the policy pieces as well. So this is a piece where I think Step Up, and again, in Savannah, we don't have other agencies that are working on policy. And of course, we're not at the state capitol, it's in Atlanta. And so it was a very new piece, and one that I think everybody recognized there needed to be some work done on. And this is where our relationship with the city, I think, it's been a very healthy development to sort of pull away a bit, because it's difficult to be an advocate and push the system sometimes if you're right in it and part of it. Not impossible, but it's a different kind of work. So we have found that being an independent 501c3, helps us on that score. So that major issues, the way we do our policy work is very, very similar. We've been very fortunate. We've received some grants from the Mary Reynolds Babcock Foundation, and we specifically chose to make sure that we were having an attorney work with us. So we chose our Georgia Legal Services, our local nonprofit legal services agency. And we funnel a portion of that, those funds to Georgia Legal Services to help us on this. The issues that we identify, again, really come out of the work itself and come from the community. Our core ones so far have been affordable housing. It is obviously foundational. It is access to public benefits and maximizing those benefits. And then what I broadly call predatory lending. So just a couple of key pieces on that. And as I say, so just by way of process, the issues generally sort of bubble up through our various volunteer committees. We ask our own people to do their research, but then we supplement with our research on staff. And then when we are going to we're asking the organization to take a position, we have to have a full board vote. So you have to get all 39 players on board. And that includes our mayor, our county commission chairman, the regional head of Georgia Power, the head of the Economic Development Authority, the head of the chamber. So as you can imagine, these have been fascinating, difficult, and at times very tense conversations. And particularly the latest one on predatory lending, which I'll talk about in 1 second. But these are just some resources. So affordable housing, the big thing that we did early on was, that was part of our original action plan. Affordable housing is a huge issue in Savannah. We've got a very old housing stock. We've got very energy inefficient housing. And we don't have a lot. We have 2 nonprofit developers in the whole city, and both of them are team. So it's how you draw down capital and get places built is very tough. We identified the strategy of going for an affordable housing fund, which has been used by communities all over. There's something in the neighborhood of 600 some affordable housing trust funds around the country. And that took us 2 years to advocate for that. And I'm talking about all the way from starting the research to going to our board, which, again, they had never had a conversation like that before, and trying to get them to think about policy. That was the very first issue where we asked them to come out. And we actually asked our board to be the advocates at City Hall for this. And again, that made a huge difference because you had business people there making that argument. We are the first municipality in the state of Georgia to have an affordable housing fund. We are now, I would say we have an advisory committee. I sit on that advisory committee on behalf of Step Up Savannah. But our next struggle with that, and this is not an easy one, has been to try to find a dedicated public revenue source for that. Different states have different ways that they can go about doing that. In Georgia, we've got difficulty because the power for designating any taxes for any specific purpose resides with the state legislature. So it's not necessarily an easy local fix. So we have been working on the funding of that. But we're very, very excited about that possibility. And the idea is, of course, the funds go, in our case, you can structure them in different ways. Our funds go to construct and rehabilitate housing, which is very, very critical. Food stamps I want to talk about for a minute. You know, we talk about maximizing benefits, and again, that's been a really, really critical piece of the pie here. Our research, first of all, early on showed us that of our poor households in Savannah, 62% of them are people who are working, to your point. And so these are, we generally have a low wage workforce. And these are folks that are eligible for food stamps. Now, what we have found, the system in Georgia was so difficult to navigate. And so not only did we see the issues on the part from our business community, but we also found that just getting through that system was very, very difficult for applicants. So in fact, we've had to dive in and figure out what's going on at the state level with our food stamps program, which I can answer any questions about if anybody's interested. The last one is on car title loans specifically. And the reason that that's, and I mentioned that particular debate was a very, very tough one. When you've got business leaders there and in the South, they're really not sympathetic and warm and fuzzy about the idea of regulating business. So it really it took a lot of discussion and real hard data and very good sort of anecdotes, if you will, stories of people that have gone down that rabbit hole and ended up thousands and thousands of dollars in debt. In Savannah, car title loans, in Georgia, we don't have payday lending any longer. There's a great story behind that. But car title loans are a huge provider. And they basically are charging 300% APR. And because they're defined as a pawn shop by the state of Georgia, they get out of any kind of regulation. So there's zero regulation. And they're not even considered a loan. So this has been, just educating folks on that score was part of the opening with our business community. But I can tell you, we've already heard from several businesses that, you know, in essence, they want to sort of pull out of the partnership because they're so concerned about us talking about car title loans. So how we navigate this citywide public education campaign and the push for municipal regulation of that industry is going to be very, very interesting and challenging, and I'm actually really looking forward to it because it's just the kind of work I love. But, you know, it requires, you know, really working on those relationships. So here we are, and I'm sure people have questions. So